So I think he's a terrific leader. I love him as a, as an athlete, as a player, as a guy who just he's got what you want for the quarterback position. Guys love playing for him, and he is an accountable player. We saw that at Alabama. We saw wherever he was. But does he have the talent, physically have the talent to be that elite quarterback? I don't think he'll get to elite status. It's got to be, is he good enough to rally this team with the pieces around him, on both sides of the ball, not to not screw it up, but to get to a point where they can be competitive. And I'm talking about not just making the playoffs, I'm talking about doing something in the playoffs.
Welcome back to the show, Birds 365, here on a Monday. The you see Bob Glauber, the great Bob Glauber, national NFL columnist from Newsday. Bob, I have to tell you right off the bat, Jody McDonald having technical issues, so you're stuck with me. But I'm thrilled to have you. And
that's the upset, John, that he's having technical difficulties and I'm not.
Yeah, a lot of storms in the area. We're all on the East Coast, obviously, so we're having a bunch of technical issues. But I'm thrilled to have you, Bob. Good to see you.
Hey, John, is the picture centered? I look like I'm off to one side.
I think you were off to one side, but that's your camera. Yeah, there you go. Now we can see all the books. Now I know you've read all
the garbage on the floor. Go ahead.
Yeah, all that stuff. No, well, I always say I'm a writer. Bob is an author, so that's different. Bob is a higher level. The Forgotten First. I'm gonna pimp that. Great book. I've read it. Tremendous, and we'll talk about that. But I do want to get into some NFL issues first, and obviously, in Newsday, you're based in New York with the Giants and Jets, two teams. In a lot of ways, Bob, I call this the I-95 draft because you thought about where the Eagles were in the process when they started, before they started making all the moves. They had 3 first-round picks. You had the Giants and the Jets with 2 each in the top 10. Where are the Giants and the Jets with all these changes? Which team do you think is a little bit ahead? Because for the first time in a long time, Bob, I'm starting to think the Jets might be ahead of the Giants.
I think that is a correct read, John, because for a couple of reasons. The general manager there, Joe Douglas, has now had 3 years. He worked in the Eagles front office, so people there should be familiar with him. And so he's had 3 years to kind of redo this roster. Now, that first year was a little weird because he inherited Adam Gase. And Gase actually brought him to the organization. And if Joe Douglas turns out to be the real deal, the Jets can thank Adam Gase for bringing him in. I'm serious, because they were very close in Chicago. And Gase put in the good word. But he's had time. But that first year, he went with Gase, and it just didn't work out. So it was a roster that was kind of stuck in a transition for a year too long, normally when a GM comes in the first year. So that said, he's got a quarterback. And I think that's important. Now, Zach Wilson is not Aaron Rodgers. He's not Joe Namath. He's not Joe Montana. He's not any of that. But he's a young quarterback with talent and an upside. So he had a rocky first year. The fact that he's coming back to a team that has had a good offseason in terms of roster improvement, the fact that he knows the system a year in, the fact that there are better things around him gives the Jets a chance. Now you go to the Giants. Now Daniel Jones has been there. This is his 4th year. Yeah. But in this time, he's kind of shown who he is. And I like to call it good, not great. And maybe good is stretching it a little bit because he just has not been consistent. So I think the Jets are ahead of the Giants in terms of the roster building process. I don't know if it's going to be better record-wise, but it should be.
Now, you mentioned good, not great with Daniel Jones, Bob. The one thing you have if you're playing is the luxury of playing time. If you're playing well, nobody's going to take you off the field. I mean, that's the bottom line. However, you get the sense, and I'm on the outside looking in, you get the sense that the Giants are doing this rebuild. And the plan is after this year, we can start kickstarting, start looking for the quarterback. Doesn't seem like there's a lot of belief in Daniel Jones. Is that the right take on it?
Totally accurate take, totally logical, and you're spot on, John. And they don't want to say that. They don't want to say, yeah, we don't think Daniel Jones is the guy. Of course not. Right? They're trying to run a franchise. But the fact that they did not give him a 5th-year option, what else do you need? What other clue do you need to know that this team does not believe long-term in Daniel Jones? Now, he can change the narrative. How does he do that? He has a great season. And he shows that in Brian Dable's system, which is much more quarterback-friendly than Jason Garrett's, that he has a chance. So it will cost the Giants $8 million more in terms of applying the franchise tag as it would have been to give him a 5th-year option. That's chump change in this league, right?
Yeah.
So they have the ability, they have the flexibility to deal with him down the road if he puts together a season that is beyond expectation. Now, the one thing that Daniel Jones has going in his favor is, the one time he was in a system that was quarterback friendly, more quarterback friendly than the one that Jason Garrett had, was with Pat Shurmur in year 1. And he threw 24 touchdowns and 12 interceptions. He started in week 3, right? So he replaced Eli after week 2. So he has shown that, when the system is right, he can thrive in that. He did have a problem with turnovers in terms of fumbling, but he threw 21 touchdowns combined in the last 2 years under Jason Garrett's system. Well, you bring in a quarterback-friendly head coach, Brian Dable, who developed Josh Allen in a very meaningful way, and you see what happens. You roll the dice and give it a shot.
And the backfield, Bob, is just as interesting to me because you have Saquon Barkley, who, it's pretty evident, and we can talk about the valuation of the running back position, and I'm certainly in that category that you probably shouldn't be drafting a running back that high in the draft to begin with. But going all the way back there, that's spelt milk at this point.
Right.
Is that a situation where the Giants, and, Saquon's had injury issues as well, but if he stays healthy, could this be a situation where they're like, let's give him the ball 300 times. We're moving on anyway. And let's see what happens with this. And in a lot of ways that's unfair, but I could see it happening.
Yeah. I don't know about 300 times. That's a lot, man.
That is a lot. But we've seen teams do that.
Yeah. You keep feeding them. I don't see that, though. I don't see I don't see a workhorse type situation here where they're just going to put the offense on his back. They will give him a lot, but you got to remember he's had 3 straight seasons in which he's lost time because of injuries.
Yeah,
and he had a bad knee injury 2 years ago. He had a bad ankle injury last year on a freak play against Dallas early in the season. He's healthy now. And what we've seen so far in these offseason workouts, and look, that's not going to be their game plan, but, it gives you an indication of what they might have in mind for Saquon Barkley. They're moving him around a lot. They're lining him up as a tailback. They're lining him up as a flanker, split out wide. So they're doing a number of things to try to bring out the best and the most in Saquon Barkley and try to make it easier for Daniel Jones to at least have a safe outlet. I mean, the best thing you could do for Daniel Jones is have him drop back and throw that swing pass to Saquon Barkley in space and have him go 50, right? Everything looks good. Everything looks good there. It's safe. It's not going to happen all the time, but that's the idea. They want to get him into space. Bill Parcells, he used it derisively about running backs who called them satellite running backs, like Reggie Bush, satellite, and you got to put him out in space. Now, Parcells himself prefers a good between the tackles runner, but that's not what Barkley is. And I think that the Giants made the mistake of kind of treating him that way the last 2 years when he was on the field, kind of pounding him up the middle. That's, he can do that, but you're not getting the most out of him when you do that.
You mentioned Brian a couple of times, Brian Daboll taking over as the head coach. For years, and you know this, covering the Giants for as long as you have, this was one of the most, consistent, stable organizations in the NFL. And then all of a sudden they move away from Jerry Reese, and all of a sudden you have McAdoo, and you have a new coach every 2 years, it seems. And you mentioned Pat Shermer a little bit, and obviously Joe Judge. Obviously it's tremendously early, and it's about more than Brian Daboll. You have Mike Kapka, our old friend here in Philadelphia, is the offensive coordinator. Wink Martindale is the defensive coordinator. Do you think the Giants finally got it right with the coaching staff?
I am cautiously optimistic they got it right, not only with the coaching staff, but with Joe Schoen as the general manager. And that probably is the most overarching important thing there, because Dave Gettleman, his tenure was an unmitigated disaster. You got to face it. It just, that team went from bad to rock bottom. And it hasn't been that bad in this town for over a sustained period of time since the 1970s. And John, the fumble when Herm Edwards scooped up that fumble from Joe Pisarcik to Larry Saka, that was 1978. And that's a long time to go between rock bottom eras, but that's how bad it has been for the Giants. Lack of stability at the coaching position and bad personnel decisions by the general manager. And I think the one mistake that John Mara, the team owner, made was, he hired Gettleman thinking he was going to get stability, thinking he was going to get the next George Young. Let's face it. And George Young was the greatest general manager in franchise history. He's in the Hall of Fame. He turned that team around after the fumble. But Gettleman turned out to be a bad personnel guy. He drafted Barkley with number 2 instead of a quarterback. He had Josh Allen there. But the problem was, after 2 years, he fired Pat Shermer. He didn't clean house there. That was the problem. So it's hiring Dave Gettleman is one thing. Rehiring him was the real mistake there, if you will. And the Giants are still paying for it. So Joe Schoen is the guy. And Daboll, I think, will be a good head coach. But listen, John, this town's not very patient. Philadelphia's not very patient either. It's going to be a bad year. It's going to be a bad year for the Giants. So you're going to have to give Brian Daboll some patience that, other coaches have not had the last couple of times.
Well, yeah, it looks like the Giants are set for the rebuild. I think fans will start to understand that. Maybe I'm a little bit wrong, because it's been so long, and both New York football teams have been down for so long. But I think you see some light with the Jets. I do want to get the national perspective from you, because here it's the exact opposite. I think people are skipping steps. I call this list season. Everybody's putting out their power rankings, Bob. Everybody, Pro Football Focus just said the Eagles, they haven't had 1,000-yard receiver since Jeremy Maclin. They say they have the 4th best receiving group in the NFL now. Obviously, their offensive line is tier 1, according to Joe Banner and Mike Tannenbaum at the 33rd team. All these, on paper, the Eagles look okay, but you need the quarterback. And Matthew Stafford isn't the quarterback, and Tom Brady isn't the quarterback, and Aaron Rodgers isn't the quarterback. What is your take on the Eagles in their offseason?
I think they've had a very vibrant offseason, which Howie Roseman has made a habit of doing, for better or for worse. And I think it's been a very aggressive, but I think a smartly aggressive effort by Roseman and his staff to build around Jalen Hurts. The question is, and the question will always be with any team and any young quarterback, is this the right guy? I personally think there is a limited ceiling with Jalen Hurts. You don't go in the second round without there being an issue, not in this league. So I think he's a terrific leader. I love him as a as an athlete, as a player, as a guy who just he's got what you want for the quarterback position. Guys love playing for him, and he is an accountable player. We saw that at Alabama. We saw it wherever he was. But does he have the talent, physically have the talent to be that elite quarterback? I don't think he'll get to elite status. It's got to be, is he good enough to rally this team with the pieces around him, on both sides of the ball, not to not screw it up, but to get to a point where they can be competitive. And I'm talking about not just making the playoffs. I'm talking about doing something in the playoffs. I personally don't see that, but I would love to be convinced otherwise.
I always look at San Francisco and for what the Eagles are trying to build. If you think about what the 49ers have done with Kyle Shanahan, and you have 2 Final Four appearances, and I would argue if Nick Bosa doesn't get hurt, maybe, that kind of set things in a negative direction the year they kind of took a step back. And obviously Jimmy Garoppolo is not a superstar quarterback. So as difficult as it is to win without the star, the Bradys, the Rodgers, even the Matthew Staffords, is it viable consistently to do what San Francisco has been able to do with Kyle Shanahan, and the fact that, hey, they outplayed Kansas City in the Super Bowl, Bob. They probably should have won that football game. And then you fast forward, they were very close to going back again this season. Is the margin of error just too small? Is that why the 49ers are looking for Trey Lance? Is that why? Is it just too difficult to do it that way?
I think so. I think that's a good read. And I think it's a very interesting comparison of Philadelphia to San Francisco, because that's what you've got. San Francisco built around Jimmy Garoppolo. They built around the margins. But if you don't have that big time quarterback, you're only going to get so far. I mean, John, that team is one overthrown pass to Emmanuel Sanders away from winning a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
Kansas City. That's how close that game was. Props to Patrick Mahomes. He's a legendary player, and he showed in that game. But the fact is, they could have and probably should have won that game. They didn't. But and I know that they see a limited upside in Jimmy Garoppolo, and that's why he will not play for the 49ers anymore. And it's going to be Trey Lance, come hell or high water. And that's going to be a painful process, getting a young guy going. But that's their decision. I mean, that's just the reality of life in today's NFL is you've got to have the big time quarterback to really have a reasonable shot at contending for championships. And, it hasn't always been that way. I mean, Brad Johnson won a Super Bowl, right? That's probably Trent Dilfer won a Super Bowl.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in today's NFL. It just doesn't.
And is that in many ways explain why Deshaun Watson is the guy of all people to get the first fully guaranteed, not Kirk got a fully guaranteed, but 5 years, I think $230 million fully guaranteed contract with, at the time, 22 civil allegations, which has risen to 24. Does that surprise you at all that this league would go down that route with a player like that? Or is it just, you've been around, is it just about winning above all else and this guy can play and we're going to go down this road?
Yeah, unfortunately it is a league just about winning, and they'll do whatever it takes. I think there was enough of a collective sigh of relief after there was no criminal indictment or charge. And that's when you saw the floodgates open up for Deshaun Watson. In Indianapolis wanted him. Texans wouldn't trade him there. Atlanta was really making an effort. Carolina and Cleveland, kind of comes from behind with that. And that really the difference was that guaranteed money as far as I'm concerned, because I think there were viable offers in Carolina and Atlanta. But yeah, it does speak to the fact that this league is all about winning, is all about quarterbacks. And I don't know that you're going to see guaranteed contracts in that range in terms of the entire contract being fully guaranteed. I think it's an anomaly right now, but the league is certainly trending that way. And back in the day, there were just no guaranteed contracts in the NFL. Zero.
Yeah.
There are a handful now. And it was because of the injury factor. But I think we've seen more and more that quarterbacks are able to play. Quarterbacks in particular are able to play longer. And that risk of injury is not as prevalent. And owners are therefore willing to at least consider the outlier contract if they feel that a player is there of a certain caliber.
When it comes to the penalty phase, I want to get your thought on that, Bob, because from my perspective, Roger Goodell has always been very, I'll say, rabbit ears when it comes to public perception. And I go all the way back to Ray Rice. If you remember Ray Rice, the 2-game suspension, then the video comes out after, and it was awful. And for everyone who remembers it, all of a sudden, you had this public outcry, understandably so. And Roger kind of wanted to revisit it, almost double jeopardy in a legal sense. It's not a court, but and he got in trouble from that aspect, trying to re-legislate the penalty. Do you think this league, number one, do you think this league is too cognizant of outside public perception? And the second part of that, does that mean Deshaun Watson might go from 6 games to 12 games or maybe even a full season? Or who knows? People have brought up the pitcher in baseball, Trevor Bauer? Yeah. Trevor Bauer, which I don't think is going to be that harsh. But just your thoughts on the way Rodgers handled the penalty aspect, and if you think public perception kind of fuels it.
Oh, I think there's no question the NFL is very concerned about public perception. I think Goodell has been over time. He got crushed on the Ray Rice penalty, the initial penalty, rightly so. 2 games for what happened there was nothing, and that really created a years-long problem for him in terms of that situation. But the league did change as far as its emphasis on domestic violence. But now you come back to Deshaun Watson, and hey, where are you with that? Now, there's one dynamic here, John, that plays into it. It's not just Roger Goodell's show here. They changed things around in the discipline phase of it, where there is a mutually appointed arbiter here, and it's a judge. I do not recall her name, but she will have just as much of a say as Roger Goodell here, maybe even a bigger say. Ultimately, it's the league's decision, but I do think, based on public perception, based on the 2 additional women who have come forward with charges against and civil lawsuits against Deshaun Watson, I do think this will be a longer suspension than perhaps it would have been had those things not happened or some other circumstances came to be. So I think this will be a significant suspension. And if it's not, I think there's going to be a huge outcry that the league went way too, not harsh enough against Deshaun Watson. So a lot of people want to know what's going to happen. I think we'll find out within 2 weeks what that penalty will be. And
you think it's going to be that soon? 2 weeks?
I think it'll be by the end of June. Yep.
All right.
Listen, John, you can't wait much longer.
Yeah, that's true.
You got training camp. You have to decide well before then, and the league shuts down for most of the month of July. It's got to be done.
Yeah, July 4th news dump, maybe that weekend.
I say if it's going to be a news dump, then it's going to be a very light suspension. If it's going to be a harsh suspension, I think it'll be done with plenty of time for the league to.
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a very good point.
If they think the public perception is going to be, yes, they got it right, it will come out not on the July 4th Friday.
All right. Speaking of controversy, he is Bob Glauber at Bob Glauber on Twitter. Follow him there at Newsday Sports, the NFL columnist for New York's Newsday, one of the best to ever do it. And with Father's Day coming up, I want to mentioned Bob's book, The Forgotten First. Tremendous book with Keyshawn Johnson, The Untold Story of the first 4 African-American players to break the color barrier in pro football: Kenny Washington, Woody Strode, Marion Motley, Bill Willis. So everybody, if your dad is a football fan, make sure you pick that up. It's a tremendous read. Bob,
Look at that. I got it.
Yeah. I appreciate you jumping on the show. Sure. And Bob, one more controversy. I can't let you. Jack Del Rio, is he going to survive this?
Wow. It's a tough one. I think that'll be up to Jack Del Rio. I don't think Ron Rivera wants to fire him. I think the controversy will die down at some point, and it's a matter of whether Jack Del Rio feels he can face the players, and the players feel that they can face Jack Del Rio, and him be their leader. I suspect that he will continue as defensive coordinator, but I could also see a parting of the ways. I don't mean to be wishy-washy on it, but it's a tough call. We're in uncharted waters on this thing, right?
Yeah, it's a very tough call. Very difficult situation. Ron Rivera's had so much to deal with unbelievable. Yep. And he's done a tremendous job. And Ron's a difficult guy not to root for, but man, just like to have some smooth waters for Ron Rivera.
Yeah. He has not had it, man. But he's the perfect coach to kind of get through this series of storms. I just don't know how much more a guy can go through without it buckling under him.
Speaking of series of storms, hopefully the next time, and you're certainly going to be back, Bob, hopefully Jody Mack will make it and get past his series of storms. Appreciate it, though, buddy. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure, John. Always good to talk. I'll see you soon.